Hey, what's up everyone? It's Michael from Colorcubic, and I'm back again with a new episode of Design with Purpose. So in this episode, what I wanted to do was revisit an earlier episode, which you can find here, called Circles from Object Surfaces. The reason I wanted to revisit this episode is because some people didn't really seem satisfied with the process I had introduced in the previous tutorial, mainly due to the fact that that process introduced ngons to the final results. Now, I understand that there are those who absolutely hate ngons, and there's a reason for that. I can't dismiss that. If you're working with a team of people, or you're working in game engines, or you're trying to texture your models, sometimes ngons can result in some nasty topology issues, but that's not always the case. And so at the end of the day, what matters is how does the final render look? And I can't emphasize that enough because it's easy to get consumed with process to a point where it becomes obsessive and it's kind of negligible, right? Like it doesn't really result in anything different. As long as the final render looks good, that's all that matters. But there are those who will probably disagree with me, and that's okay. With that said, I did want to revisit this and introduce a process that solved that problem that doesn't result in ngons. So that's what we're going to do here in this video. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to preface this with the fact that I'm working in Cinema 4D R19 for this tutorial. With that said, earlier versions, at least up to Cinema 4D R16, you should be able to follow along with this process all the way up into R23, I believe is where Maxon is at now. So if that's not the case, please feel free to leave your concerns or comments or questions in the comment section, and I will do my best to respond to you as promptly as I can with some kind of solution. With all that out of the way, let's jump into it. So let me just clear off my scene here, and I'm going to come over here to filter. I'm going to re-enable my grid. I'm going to make sure that my live selection tool is selected and also the model tab is selected. Now I'm going to come over here to my primitive tab, and I'm going to click and hold this, and I'm going to come over to plane and select plane. Now let me just zoom in here real quick. And here we can see our plane in our objects panel. I'm going to come down here to the attributes tab of our plane, and now I'm going to change the orientation from +Y to +Z. All right, now before we do anything else, let's come up here to display, and let's click and hold this and come down to Garrod Shading Lines. There we go. Now you can see there's, we've got this square plane, the square flat plane, but it's comprised of all of these polygons. So we don't really need that many. That's way too much. So with our plane selected in our objects panel, let's come back to our attributes tab, and let's change the width and height segments from 20 to 2. So both our width and height segments are 2 each. Now, I want you to make a note of the width and height dimensions, not the segments, but the dimensions. You can see here that they're 400 centimeters by 400 centimeters. And that'll make sense later on in the video when we turn this into an array. So now that we're done with that, let's come back up here to our primitive tab. Let's click and hold this, and now let's select cylinder. Now with our cylinder selected in our objects panel, let's come down to the attributes tab of our cylinder, and let's change the orientation from +Y to +Z. Now we also want to change the rotation segments from 36 to 8, which will create an octagon. Next, what we want to do is change the radius from 50 centimeters to 100 centimeters. Okay, now that we're done with that, let's come back up to our objects panel, and let's change the content hierarchy so the plane is on top of the cylinder. Next, what we want to do is come over to our array tab. Let's click and hold this, and let's come over to bool and select bool. Now let's select our plane, and let's hold the shift key on our keyboard and also select our cylinder. Now let's click and drag and drop both our plane and cylinder into our bool tool. Now you can see what's happened is the octagon cylinder has knocked out a hole from our plane. But in doing so, it actually created 8 quadrangle polygons that comprise the circumference of this hole. So what quadrangle polygons are, they're 4-sided polygons. So what that does is that ensures that there are no ngons. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is let's go ahead and double click our bool and let's rename it to hole. You don't have to do that, but I like to keep my objects named so things don't get confusing. All right, so now that that's done, I'm going to hold down the command key if you're on a Mac, control key if you're on a PC, and with that key held down, I'm going to click and drag up to duplicate my hole. Now what I want to do is I want to double click these 2 radio buttons so they're both red. I'm doing this to the original hole so it's off the scene. And the reason I like to do that is because if I need to come back to refer to the original assets, they won't be saved down into editable objects, so I can still make adjustments if I need to. It's just good practice. All right, so with our duplicate hole selected, let's come over here to our subdivision surface hypernerb, and let's hold down the Alt Option key on our keyboard and select that. What that will do is that will nest our duplicate hole in the subdivision surface hypernerb. Now you can see what's happened is it's turned our plane and hole into a perfect hole comprised of even quadrangle polygons that make up the circumference of this hole. Now this is exactly what we want except for the corners. The corners are rounded. Now some of you might be totally satisfied with this and that's great, but for those who aren't, we can fix this pretty easily. The first thing we need to do is come back to our duplicate hole, which is nested in the subdivision surface hypernerb. Now I want you to right click on the hole, come down to select children, right click again, and come down to connect objects plus delete. What this has done is it's converted our hole to an editable object. So now with our hole selected, I want you to come over here to the point selection tab. And now with the shift key held down, I want you to select the 4 corners of our hole. So just 1, 2, 3, 4. Now on your keyboard, I want you to select M for Michael and R for Robert. Now click and drag to the right. And what that will do is that will create these angles, these sharp 90-degree angles. Now, there's a detail here I want you to pay close attention to, because if you don't, when we turn this into an array, it won't be completely flat. So make sure when you're dragging to the right that the corners go perfectly flat into the corner. Now let's come back over here to our live selection tool and let's click off the scene. So that looks good. Next, what I want to do is come back over here to our objects panel, and with our subdivision surface hypernerb selected, let's come over here to MoGraph. Let's come down to Cloner, hold down the Alt Option key on your keyboard and select Cloner. What that will do is that will nest our subdivision surface hypernerb, which has our hole in it, in our cloner. Now right away, this isn't what we want at all, but we can make a few adjustments and turn this into an array pretty quickly. So with our cloner selected in our objects panel, let's come down to the attributes tab of our cloner, and in mode, let's change this from linear to grid array. Now we need to make a few more adjustments because we don't need 3 duplicates of this array. We only need 1 array. So let's come down to count. Let's come over here to the Z index. Let's change this from 3 to 1. Now what we want to do is we want to adjust the size of the X and Y axis. Now if you recall, our original plane was 400 centimeters by 400 centimeters. And we need to duplicate this by 2, or multiply it by 2. So instead of 400 centimeters by 400 centimeters, we need to change these to 800 centimeters by 800 centimeters. And there's our array. Now let's say you want to have a larger array, larger than this. Let's increase the count by 2. So instead of 3 by 3, it'll be 5 by 5. But in doing so, we also need to adjust the size. So again, we're going to increase this by 800, so 1600 by 1600. And there we go. I actually want to increase it just a little bit more. So instead of 5 by 5, I'm going to make it 7 by 7. And in doing so, the size will be 2400 by 2400. There we go. So all of that looks good. There's one other thing I want to do to this because I'd like to add some depth to this. So let's come back over here to our objects panel. Let's click this green check from our cloner and click the green check from our subdivision surface hypernerb. And let's come down to our hull and select hull. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. And now I'm going to come over here to our surface polygons tab. And I'm going to right click and come up to close polygon hull. Now, if you just mouse over, you'll see a preview of what this will look like when the hull is filled in. Go ahead and click that. Now, right away, if you have ngon lines turned on, which you can find here in filter, right here, if you have that turned on, you can see these little ngons. Now, what ngons are is they're essentially uneven cuts in a polygon if it's not four-sided and it can't find symmetry. So in this instance, although there is symmetry, for some reason Cinema 4D thinks that this makes the most sense with these cuts. It doesn't, but this doesn't really matter because all we're doing is we're going to manipulate the surface of this just to create some gutters and depth, and then we're going to delete it so the ngons won't actually be there. Before we get started, one thing I want to do is press Command A if you're on a Mac, Control A if you're on a PC to select all of the polygons. Next, I'm going to right click and come down to reverse normals. So the normals of this plane are all facing forward. Now I'm going to select this filled in hole. I'm going to right click, come down to extrude inner, and click and drag to the left just to create a subtle gutter. Now I'm just eyeballing this, but if you'd like to add in specific dimensions, you can come to the attributes tab of our extrude inner tool and add in those values in the offset. Now I'm going to right click again, come down to extrude, and I'm going to click and drag to the left to create depth. I'm just going to orbit a little bit, and I'm going to do this a couple more times. Just click and drag to the left to create some depth. Okay, that looks good. And now that I'm done with that, I'm just going to press the delete key just to delete the surface of that. So there are no ngons on this. Now let's come back up to our live selection tool and over here to our model tab. And now what we can do is we can re-enable our subdivision surface hypernerb by clicking this red X, and then re-enable our cloner by clicking that red X. So now we have this array with depth. So now with our cloner object selected, let's come back over to the array tab, click and hold this, and then select connect. And now I'm going to click and hold the cloner. I'm going to drop this into the connect object. And this has connected everything. So now what we can do is with our connect object selected in our objects panel, let's right click. Let's come down to select children. Let's right click again. And let's come down to connect objects plus delete. And what this has done is it's created and connected all of the objects and fused all of the edges. So it's essentially one seamless object comprised of all of these quadrangle polygons. And now what we can do is let's come up to display and let's select garage shading instead of garage shading lines. And there we go. So that's the end of this tutorial. Clean, editable object comprised of holes knocked out of the surface of it. Pretty easy. I mean, if you cut out all of my rambling, this takes about like a couple minutes. Now, if you found this process helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you haven't already, be sure to click that notification bell so when new content is added to the channel, you'll be notified. Now, I do want to add one more thing to this before we end the video. I will be coming up with a new video that will expand upon this particular technique that will apply holes to curved surfaces, because I know that this is a flat surface and I know some people had some concerns about the previous tutorial video from the circles from object surfaces, and they had mentioned that that technique doesn't work with curved surfaces or rounded surfaces. So there is another technique that expands upon this one that allows us to do that. So with all that said, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.